So the purpose of this evening is primarily to talk about the internet. But as a school, and that's why I'm standing here, although Ramat was supposed to be, we feel responsible to sort of broaden the awareness, your awareness, to include other places and people and activities where your child might become exposed to the kinds of things that Mr. Salzman is going to be talking about, not me. So we want you, as a parent in Beit Yaakov Benos Malka, to be comfortable with who you are and where you are in Eretz Yisrael and in a Beit Yaakov. So first, we're a Beit Yaakov. What that means, we're not going to discuss here. If anybody has a question, one-on-one, anytime at all, just make an appointment through Shira, B'simcha Rabbah. I don't think there's too many people who don't know what that means sometimes, and that's okay. But it does have a lot to do with what we're going to be seeing here, what's acceptable to you, what's acceptable to others. Nobody's judging. It's just a question of where you're putting yourself in or where you're not. Okay, our job in Beit Yaakov Benos Malka is to make sure that under the roof of Beit Yaakov Benos Malka, your daughter is protected from the influences of the street and from a culture that might be foreign to a Beit Yaakov. That's our job as a school. In your own home, your parents, you have good judgment, and we trust you. We assume that you can tell what would be acceptable for a Beit Yaakov and what wouldn't be. The idea of writing out a checklist of every single thing is something that is abhorrent, is that a strong enough word, to me personally, to my Rabbanim, to Dr. Rosenwasser, to anybody that we're mityaitz with in terms of chinuch. The idea that we can trust the parent body is the nikaron that we're building the school on. But if a person proves that they can't be trustworthy, so that's a little difficult, then what do we do? And that's the kind of stuff that a school as it grows deals with. Baruch Hashem. It's part of the challenge, and we welcome the challenge. We're excited about the challenge. So you're partners. So we're going to make this work. So again, in your own home, you know if there's an activity or an exposure that's in line with the Beit Yaakov or not, and you could always clarify, and we want you to clarify. It's imperative that we work together as a team, and if you choose to send your child to a Beit Yaakov, then you need to know what that means, and again, I'm happy to clarify anytime. But we're not only protective of your individual daughter, because everybody thinks, oh, this is about me. It's not. It's not about me. It's not about you. What this is about is that we, as a school, are protective of your class, of your child's class. And that's what we were hired to do. We're hired to be your child's school, not just about your child, but it's also about your child's environment. So therefore, we're responsible to make sure that what's brought into the school fits in and reflects the values of the school, Beit Yaakov Benos Malka, and also the families in the school who give us the responsibility to be protecting their children from things that they want their children protected from. So we call that sensitivity, we call that derech eretz, we call that v'ahavta recha kamocha. These are important things. So your child can be exposed to concepts and notions that are not in cognizance with Beit Yaakov Benos Malka. For example, through music, through media, obviously through internet, which is something that Mr. Salzman is going to talk about. In play dates, it's your job to check out that the family you're sending your child to understands your sensitivities, let's say. It's not the school's job to call up every parent in the school and say, remember, when you have Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah over for a play date, their family is makpid in this way. You should be asking those questions as a parent. I assure you, in America, across the board, you would not send your child to anybody's house unless you made sure that their standards matched your standards. Somehow we come to Eretz Yisrael, and everything's got l'mahadrin. Guess what? It's not. Ever. And so we have to be aware of that in the same way. Chugim. There are chugim that might reflect your values, and that's great, but they might not reflect the values of a Beit Yaakov. If it's hard for you to figure out, again, please ask. We're open to talk about these things. As your child gets older, I'm not talking about a first grader, because that's a different developmental stage. But as your child gets older, do you want them exposed to secular music? If so, it's possible that Beis Yaakov isn't really the place for you. It could be. I'm not saying not. I'm not saying yes. Something to think about. It might be that if your children's teachers in Chugim are irreligious Jews, it might be that the subject matter that's discussed between the Madrichot and the Chanichot are not what you want your daughter coming home with. It might be that her after-school activities with her friends from the Chug they might be doing things or talking about things or exposing your children to things that you in a million years had no clue about. You didn't think to ask your daughter. Your daughter definitely wasn't going to tell you because she knows it's like slightly naughty. And then what happens? Where are you? And then you're uninformed. Don't you want to be informed? I want to be informed. So I can only deal with what's going on under the roof of Bnos Malka. But you as parents, you have to be informed. Make your decisions. Whatever your decisions are good. It's good for you. It's good for your family. Excellent. But know what you're dealing with. You have to be aware. So be alert. Know what your children are exposed to. Don't say I had no clue what was going on. That's unacceptable. Would you go into a restaurant and they're serving you, this actually happened. They give you, let's say you go into 7-Eleven, and there's a bag of pork rinds hanging on it, the thingy there. So you take it over and you say, hey, this looks really great. Because you forgot to read the word pork, but you're reading the word rinds, and you're thinking, I don't know, watermelon, fried watermelon. And you turn it over, and it's like, pork. Oh, right, that's no good. Because we don't do pork. Now, it would never occur to you to buy that. But for a second, you were like, oh, whatever, and your kid picks it up. Okay, honey, whatever you want. No, not whatever you want. Absolutely not. So you're the parent. You're in charge. You run the show. You decide. Your children are still little. Just wait. I'm the Skena here. There's a few more who are in my category in life. Just wait. Just wait. You are not there yet. Most of you are not there yet. Some of you are. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So, literature. Know what your kid's reading. Do you have to read everything? Yeah, you do. And if you don't, then they'll read stuff that you don't want them to. Play dates, music, chugim. I don't know. There's 1,000 other things. So be alert and be aware what your children are exposed to. Be sensitive that your personal standards may not be the same standards as somebody else. And so you have to inform them how you feel. Thank you so much. And now, this is the main event, really.
Okay. Hi. My name is Brad Salzman. Thank you, everybody, for coming out, and thank you to the guys also who got shoved into the women's section. Now you know how it feels, I guess. I don't know because I'm over here. But I want to say...
Can you arrange it that we can see you, please? It's very difficult without seeing the person.
Reb Ginsburg says you can move forward. You want to handle these guys? Or? Okay. I want to thank Reb Ginsburg and Bnos Malka for organizing the event. I do think it's a very important event. I want to thank Reb Ginsburg also for changing the original email, which you may have seen, which said that anyone who didn't come tonight had to meet with me one-on-one. I'm really happy we changed that. There is apparently a second showing in September, I heard, which is a lot better than having to meet, however many people. But
Can I go for the one?
you can come for both. You can come for both. It's the same price. But I heard that there is still a requirement that if you don't have a good time tonight, you may have to stay afterwards. So I'm going to be looking around and making sure that everyone's having a good time. If not, I'm going to tell on you, okay? So I know it's late and no one really wants to be here. So I want to make this interesting, entertaining. It is a very serious topic, though, and I'm very glad, in all seriousness, that we can talk about this. So my name is Brad Salzman. This is me. I'm a therapist. I just made Aliyah a year ago from Muncie. I grew up in California. And in New York, I had a practice called the New York Sexual Addiction Center. And there you can guess what I worked with there, what we specialized in. It was sexual addiction, which is basically what I call internet addiction. It's one specific form of internet addiction. And one of my clients that I actually saw today, who is 20 years old, I mentioned to him that I was giving this presentation tonight, and he said, great. Yeah, actually, I think he said, awesome. And I'm like, why is that so awesome? He said, because my parents had no flipping idea what I was doing on the internet for all those years. And he didn't say flipping. I'm changing the words a little, but he was actually very angry about the fact that he had this problem for years and years. Comes from a very frum family, as do most people here, if not everyone here. And I think most of us as parents, we want to believe that it could never happen to us, right? That our kids are not that kind of kid, right? That our kids they're good kids, they're frum kids, they're not looking for trouble. And I think that's true for most kids, right? Unfortunately, in this case, with the internet, trouble will find you. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about. I think we all know in the frum world that the internet is a big issue, right? We've heard a lot of Gedolim speak out against having the internet whatsoever, right? There was a big asifa in New York a couple of years ago, which I think had, 50,000 people, 80,000 people, a lot of people, right? There's a lot of talk about it. One thing that I think is good about having this talk is there's an understanding that, even though a lot of Gedolim have come out and said you shouldn't have internet at all, a lot of people still have internet for whatever reason, and that's a reality that we need to deal with, right? If you have internet, what do you need to know about it to keep your family safe, right? So like I said, I think we all know that the internet is bad, right? Let me rephrase that. Parts of the internet are bad, right? I think there's also a lot of good parts about the internet. Unfortunately, there are some really very real dangerous aspects. Some of those, again, I think a lot of the stuff that you guys will be familiar with, there's the idea of, there could be child predators online, right? There could be people that could be looking for kids to meet and to seduce and to, have inappropriate relationships with. I personally, since that's not really the area that I work with, I don't work with sexual offenders, it always seemed a little bit remote to me. Until I heard of a family outside of my practice, a family that my family knows in Florida, where a 16-year-old boy, again from a yeshivish family, unfortunately was contacted by registered sex offenders through Facebook, and actually wound up meeting with a number of them, and actually had encounters with these men. So it is actually a very real problem, and it doesn't matter how frum you are or what schools you send your kids to. Everyone is unfortunately vulnerable, and God forbid it should never happen to any of us. So obviously that's a real risk. Also, a lot of people, at least in America, talk about this idea of cyberbullying. That if your kids are on the internet, other kids who might be on the internet, can be picking on them and harassing them. I don't know to what extent that really happens in the frum world, because I don't know to what extent kids are really online that are present and engaging in that kind of thing, but that's another issue as well. Of course, there are security risks in terms of your kids being online, that they may give away information, whether it's information about where they live, information, personal identifiable information that could be used for identity theft. Also that someone could use it, if they give information about where they are, that kind of thing. Obviously, very dangerous there. Right, and of course there's the exposure to non-Jewish values and other values which they may not necessarily be non-Jewish per se, but they may not be the values that you want for your kids, right? As Rebbetzin Ginsburg said, you as parents have the privilege to decide what your kids are exposed to, right, and what influences. And certainly as frum people, I think that we might be we're definitely more picky about what influences we'd like to have for our kids. And then of course there is the issue of pornography and other sexually inappropriate material. So first of all, not every kid who finds pornography online was looking for it. It affects both men and women and boys and girls. I think by the age of 11 years old, that's the average age that most children will encounter pornography online is 11. So it's pretty shocking, actually. And again, it's not always something that kids are looking for. In fact, very often, kids may not be looking for it at all. Any of you who've ever used Google, and I assume that's probably more than one or two of you in here, if you've ever done a search on Google especially an image search, for something completely non-sexual, completely clean, kosher, whatever, may have encountered some really shocking, explicit images. I know that I have, and I'm sure that other people have as well. So you can be sure that, unfortunately, if your kids have ever searched for images, unfortunately, they're also vulnerable to that, as vulnerable as we are as adults. Now, as adults, we already have our value system in place. We have our life experience. We're in a different place to be able to judge, at least to some extent. We're more protected against what kind of influence that might have on us. Kids don't have that kind of life experience yet. So, children, of course, are naturally curious, and children in different stages of development are going to be curious about different things, including about sex. And I think that there's an attitude, I think it's less so in the frum world, but even into the frum world, this idea has permeated that, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world if kids look at pornography. Now, obviously, there's a lot of isurim around looking at pornography, but again, there are some people who say, what's the big deal, right? Kids will be kids. Maybe adults in this generation may say, well, when I was a kid, I was exposed to it, and I turned out okay. So, curiosity is very normal, but it's very important to remember that porn is not harmless. Porn is actually a very dangerous, addictive, I guess you'd call it a substance. It is really addictive, though, in reality. And I just want to share a story that, again, how it has impacted, or this view has crept into the frum world. I used to work at a frum university in America a number of years ago before I went into private practice, and I had a number of college students who had issues with pornography. And it wasn't just casual viewing, it was something that was really ruining their lives. They felt that they couldn't, they were up all night, they couldn't function, it was affecting their classes, it was affecting their relationships, their ability to meet girls and women. And I remember speaking to the director of the counseling center at the time, and the dean of students, who was a psychiatrist, and they said, you know what, tell the kids to just chill out, it's normal, tell them to not be so frum, and just, don't worry about it so much. And I realized, I was like, wow, these guys are completely missing the boat. And I think that unfortunately there is some of that. It's a very Western kind of a value. It's interesting because I've given this talk a number of times over the last few years, and when I was presenting it today, I just wanted to go and review the material to see if there's any new fresh stuff that I wanted to add. Most of the stuff out there about protecting kids from the internet they're not so worried about protecting kids from porn. It's more like protect your kids from sexual predators, protect your kids from kidnappers, protect your kids from giving away any sensitive information that could lead to identity theft. And the idea, there's a much more liberal view of like, okay, so pornography, so kids will, it's a normal part of development, and they'll figure out what's appropriate and what's not. Unfortunately, what I know from the area that I work in, it's not normal. It's not innocuous. It's actually a very harmful, again, a substance, for lack of a better word. Okay, I'll give you a few. Yes, pornography can lead to addiction. It doesn't in all cases, but it can be very addictive, exactly the same way that alcohol or cocaine or cigarettes are addictive. And this is something which I think today, even in the psychological community, a lot of people are still not completely on board with this. They still think, how could something which is essentially natural, right, sex, right, something, a drive that we're all wired for, how could this become an addiction? And I think that just because of the sheer number of people that have been affected by this through the internet, the whole scientific community is beginning to shift and starting to see it as an addiction. Let me give you some quick statistics just to help you understand the gravity of the situation. There's about 25 million pornographic websites online right now, which means it's about 12% of all the websites in the world have pornography. The online pornography business generates $5 billion per year. It's a huge business across the entire world. I think about $3 billion of that is just in America, and the rest of the world is about another $2 billion. All the internet searches that are done, 25% of all internet searches are either for pornography or sex. So again, 1 out of every 4 searches on the internet is for pornography or sex. 70% of men between 18 and 24 report that they visit porn sites in a typical month. 70%. 35% of all the downloads on the internet are pornography. 35%. More than one third of all the downloads on the internet are pornographic. And 20% of men admit to watching porn at work. Something else which I saw, which I thought would be interesting for this group, and with the population that I work with now that I'm in Israel. In America, I used to work with both from and non-from. And here, so far, it's been all from. But I saw a statistic that said that, again, it's not about Orthodox Jews, but about religious Christians. People who tend to go to church on a regular basis were 26% less likely to look at porn. However, people who describe themselves as fundamentalists were 91% more likely to look at pornography. So there's a question there. When I read that, I'm curious how that translates into the Orthodox world. I'm not sure, and I certainly would hope that Orthodox people aren't more likely to be drawn to this, but I don't know. Okay, I think it's also worth mentioning here, just because we're not just talking about protecting our children. I mean, Benos Malka is a girls' school, but I think most people here, or at least some people, have sons as well. But really, the whole family is actually at risk, and I think it's worth mentioning that it's not just the kids we have to worry about; it's also our spouses, right? And the problem is, unfortunately, mostly men have this problem. It's about 3 to 1. 75% of people who become addicted to pornography or sex are men. But you should know that in the years that I've had a private practice, I've had a number of women from Haredi backgrounds who also have come to me who have issues with, who are addicted to either sex or pornography. So, but again, I think it's one of those things that we never want to consider the possibility that it could be our husband, right? And it's no one really wants to look at that. And I think there are some strong powers of denial out there that people are not my husband. You should know that I've had clients in the past who no one would ever think in a million years that this was. I'm talking about from people. I'm talking about people who sit in Kollel. I'm talking about outreach rabbis. I'm talking about I've had some extremely well-known Jewish personalities, both rabbanim and entertainers, who are known throughout the Jewish world, throughout the Haredi world, who unfortunately have this issue. Don't think that it couldn't happen to you. And again, I don't wish this on anyone. People, when they meet me and I tell them what I do, I work with internet sexual addiction. They say, well, there's an addiction I'd like to have, right? That's a joke that I hear from a lot of guys. And I say, no, you don't. You really don't. It's actually not a fun, no addiction is fun. And it's actually torture for these guys, and it rips their lives apart, it rips their families apart, and it can destroy their children. So I want to just get that message out here as well. And it's interesting, when I moved, I remember when I came to look at my apartment a year ago, and the realtor showed us the apartment. She's like, she wanted to know, do I have an income? And I said, well, this is what I do. I have this clinic in America. It's called the Sexual Addiction Center. And she was like, what? She's like, there's no such thing here in Israel. And, I think that, she's a frum lady, and I think that unfortunately people believe that it can't happen to us, or it can't happen here. You should know one of my first clients when I started my practice here was a young guy sitting in Kollel who, not to be too, I don't think I'm being too, but unfortunately he was referred to me by another therapist because after only a year of marriage, he'd been to over 200 prostitutes. Now again, this is not a typical case, but as soon as I met him, I was like, okay, it does happen here. It does happen here. It happens everywhere. Unfortunately, no one is immune. So now that I've scared you guys all, right? Hopefully, right? That is part of what I'm here for, right? Supposed to scare them, right? Everyone's scared? Say you're scared, or you have to stay after, guys. Come on, just say you're scared. Okay, good. So what can you do to to mitigate the risk, right? So first of all, I want to just pose this question, which may seem like a little bit of a crazy question, but do you really need the internet, right? I know this is sort of like, again, this sounds kind of a little bit blasphemous to ask the question, but do you really need the internet? You know, again, I know that when they had the ASIFA, there were a lot of people in the, I guess, call it mainstream American Haredi world who were saying, well, it's kind of extreme, like throwing out the whole internet. It is extreme. It is extreme, but I guess, someone has to weigh the risks. I also, I know some people who have internet at work and don't have internet at home, which is another thing to consider. Also, I want to say one other thing. When I started giving this talk, smartphones were really not an issue. And smartphones now have completely changed the game here, right? It used to be we had certain guidelines. You have one family computer, you keep it in a central room of the house, that kind of a thing, where people are coming and going, not in a private room. Now we have smartphones. So even those of you who say, well, I don't have internet, but you have a smartphone, right? Oh, I have a smartphone, yeah, but I don't have, I don't have a, internet connection just on here. Kids use smartphones too, right? And I'm going to talk about some of the things that you can do to protect your smartphone, or to, whatever the word, protect your kids from your smartphone. Okay? So that's the first question. You have to ask yourself, do you really need internet, and do you really need it at home? And if so, think about that. Think about to what extent you have that, all right? So if you do have internet, I think everyone absolutely needs to have a filter on their internet, okay? And again, this is not optional. This is not because, again, this is where people start to think, I don't have to worry about that because my husband's a tzaddik, and my kids are wonderful kids. Your husband could be a tzaddik, right? And your kids could be wonderful kids. In fact, I'm sure they are. That doesn't mean that they're not at risk, right? For whatever reason. They could see it at a friend's house. They could get some kind of exposure that you're not prepared for, something that starts the wheels in motion. You want to make sure that they're not able to pursue that, at home. I saw a study which was done by a filtering company, which said, in America, that 95% of parents, in 2011, 95% of parents said they know what their kids are doing online. I said it's complete nonsense. There is no way that you know what your kid is doing online unless you're literally sitting right next to him and you're not on your smartphone at the same time, right? You are literally sitting right next to him and your eyes are on the screen the entire time, which I can say I don't think anyone really who's prepared to do that, really for more than a couple minutes, right? Well, we have at least one parent. Okay, two. Okay, we have two parents. All right, maybe, all right, three. All right, fine. So it looks like a few people are prepared to do that. Good for you. For the rest of us mortals, I would say that we definitely need to up our game in terms of we can't assume that we know what our kids are doing online, right? Again, even if they're good kids. I was talking to actually my sister-in-law, and who my brother's wife, and I'm very close to them, and I know them very well. I know their kids, and let's see, her oldest is I think 10. And something came up where he was the oldest boy was watching something on the internet in his room, and I'm like, what are you doing? And she said, what do you mean? I'm like, you have no idea what he's looking at. And she's like, I didn't even what do you like? I have no idea. Like, I should be worried. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I said, yes, you need to be worried. Yeah, and right. Okay, so again, this going back to the scaring you part. So. Okay, so everyone needs to have a filter, right? Now, obviously, I'm not affiliated with the school. I'm not telling anyone what they need to do. I'm telling you that I believe, in my opinion, if you want to protect your kids and keep them safe, you absolutely need to have a filter, okay? Let's talk a little bit about the different filtering options. First of all, also, you want to make sure that every single device is filtered. Again, if you have a home computer and you have a filter on that, but you don't have anything on your smartphones, you're wasting your time. Right? This is an issue with some of my addicts who I try to get my addicts to put filters on their devices. As you can imagine, it's a hard thing for them to do because as much as they want to give it up, that's their drug, right? And it's very hard to quit. So, maybe they will put a filter on this but not on that, right? You need to have a filter on every single device, and that includes laptops, desktops, smartphones, tablets. If your kids have gaming systems, a Wii, an Xbox, all of those things are internet capable, and I could tell you stories of the kid who uses Xbox to access pornography. It's real. It's not far-fetched. So every single device needs to have some kind of filter on it. One program that I recommend is something called NetNanny. So I'll write that up here. Okay, it's you can download it online. I think it's around $40. It's netnanny.com. There's a lot of filters out there. I think this is one of the best ones that's out there, and this is after my own testing and also hearing from a lot of my clients. NetNanny, it's both for the PC and also for Mac. And basically the way it works is that the parent has to have the password, right? And the parent can adjust the settings so that it will automatically block, let's say, pornography, other categories, whether it's mature content, people in bathing suits, et cetera, violence, whatever things you want to block there, you can block. Now it's important to mention that no filter is 100% effective, right? Some are better than others. I think this is the best one that I know of, but none of them are 100% effective. If someone is extremely determined, and again, I've seen this with my clients, if you're really, really, really determined, you can somehow find a way. And you should know, by the way, that if you think that it's safe to let your kids go on YouTube, it's really not. YouTube has explicit sexual material on there. It is not safe. Facebook, again, you may think it's Facebook. And again, I also was surprised by this. People use Facebook. There's a lot of stuff on Facebook that I was not aware of because I use Facebook to connect with friends and that kind of thing. There's a lot of explicit sexual stuff there, and I've learned this from my clients, that people use Facebook and Twitter as well to access explicit hardcore pornography, as well as to obviously connect with other people for the purpose of sharing material, meeting up, and other bad stuff. Okay. So NetNanny, so the parent is the administrator, the parent has a password, each child has their own username or profile, and you can tweak the settings there. Now, I said none of them are 100% effective. That being said, they might be 95% effective, right? And I think, again, if you don't have someone who is really, really determined, it could be close to 100%. So I recommend that it's not a good reason not to get it. And I hear that from some of my guys, especially my computer-savvy clients, who say, well, I'm a computer expert, I can hack it on anything. It's not an excuse. You need to have a thing. We're going to say questions at the end, okay? Is that all right? So just please remember your question, okay? Speaking of computer experts. Okay, so the next I want to give you something for your phones. For your own cell phones, I recommend an app called MobiSip, which I'll just write that up here. Okay, I think it's about $10 to download. It's a very good program. Again, it requires there to be an administrator with a password who can monitor. All right, and I'm going to recommend one more thing for your phones and tablets, and this is something that I use for my kids. It's called Kids Place. And this is really appropriate for younger kids. How old does Benos Malka go up to? Which grade? Okay, all right. So it depends on the age of the kid. Certainly for my kids, my oldest is 7. It's definitely appropriate. The way Kids Place works is, so it's an app for Android and for iPhone. You put it on your phone, and when you load the program, the kid can't get out of it. You can set a time limit, and they can only use apps that you have approved. So in other words, it only uses apps that are on your phone. Like you can set it to not connect to the internet at all. That's how I set it. So the kids have zero access to the internet. And whatever kids games that I've picked out and I have on my phone or my tablet that I've already checked out and I think they're safe for them, they're allowed to select from those games for the amount of time that I set. It's very well done. It doesn't really have any major bugs or problem with it. I really recommend it, and I think it's free, which is even better. Okay. There's also, some people have heard of Internet Ramon, which in America is really not a big thing among the film world, but I think here it seems to be, I hear people talking about it. I don't know how many people actually have it. But basically the way Ramon works, it's an internet service provider. So instead of having the actual software on your computer that blocks it, the internet service provider is blocking it. And apparently, from what I understand, they have different levels that you can set it to. Etrog is also, I believe, a more higher level. I think it's for a more Haredi audience. From what I have spoken to experts who deal with this particular the internet service providers, I've heard that they are pretty effective for the general population. Again, for people who are extremely determined and who already have a problem with looking for these kind of things online, it's not going to be foolproof. I think that it certainly does not hurt to have this in addition to the filter that I mentioned before, the software. Okay, so besides filters, I think it's really important to talk to your kids. Okay, and I think, and this is, I don't know, maybe I'm going out on a limb by saying this, I think that some of us would rather find our kids had looked at porn than actually sit down and have to have a conversation with them beforehand about some of the realities of the internet. Now again, it obviously has to be age appropriate. I was saying that for the purpose of exaggeration. Obviously no one wants to see their kid has been looking at porn, but the idea of talking to our kids about the dangers of the internet is, I think, very scary for a lot of us, and that it's a very uncomfortable conversation. We don't really want to address it, and we kind of hope it never happens, right? And I think that's probably the default strategy that most of us take. When it comes to something like playing with matches, there's no one who says, you know what, I don't want to talk, I don't want to give him any ideas. So I'm not going to tell him, don't play with fire, don't play with matches, right? I'm going to tell him, right, when he's very, very little, or her, don't play with matches. This is what happens when you touch fire, you get burned. And that's how kids know to stay away from it. It's the same thing with this, right? It would be a big mistake, in my opinion, to wait until your kids get burnt to then say, okay, well, you shouldn't have done this, but I didn't want to talk about it. I was hoping you wouldn't find it. It's called the curiosity myth, this idea that if we mention it to our kids, right, that there is such a thing out there, that they're going to be, oh, really? That's interesting. Let me go check that out. That's not what happens. What's much more likely to happen in that case is your kids will come to you if they encounter something, or if they have questions about it, which is what you want. You want to, as hard as it may be, all of us need to try to be okay with the subject. And again, it has to be age appropriate. It's not like you need to go and talk about pornography to a 7-year-old, but just talking about, in fact, there are things out there which are inappropriate, and there are things there that are not safe, and things that are not good for you, and not a smart thing for you to be doing, and to tell them, and of course they might want to know what these things are. Obviously, you need to choose how you say that in the right way, but you need to have that conversation. Okay, and I would also say that the same goes for your spouse. And again, this is another really sticky situation people just would much rather not deal with. Obviously, no one would ever dream of such a thing happening to them. So they don't want to mention it. It's a very uncomfortable conversation. Again, I think it's better to mention it now than have it come out down the road, which, again, God forbid it ever does. But I really believe this is a problem that affects a lot more men than anyone knows or really wants to talk about. Okay? And the last thing that I have for you guys is it's called a family contract for online safety, okay? If you go to my website, which is easy to remember the name, bradsalzman.com, I have one. I have a pledge for kids, and what I'm going to give you right now is the parents' pledge, okay? The idea of this pledge, you can take it serious or literally in the sense of, I'm literally going to pledge to do these things, or this could be a good place to start a discussion with your kids. As I mentioned, there's a kids pledge as well, which I put it right on the top of my website, so you can get it there also. But this is the parents' pledge, and I'll just read this basically. 1, I will get to know the services and websites my child uses. Again, this is obviously in the case that your child you're letting your child use the internet. If I don't know how to use them, I'll get my child to show me how. Now it's a little bit funny, right? But kids always know how to use the internet better than parents, right? So just assume that if you think that you're checking on them and kids know how to hide their tracks much better than adults, always. So again, don't assume that if you're checking up on them, that's going to work necessarily. Again, also, I want to discourage you from secretly monitoring them. So again, I think some people may also say, well, you know what? I understand the importance of monitoring and filtering, but I don't necessarily want to have this conversation with my kids, or I don't want to make them feel that I'm spying on them. The opposite is true. What you want to have is openness and transparency with them. You want them to know, and you should tell them at the outset, look, I have put a filter on our computer and on our phone and all that to protect you guys, and it keeps track of everything that you guys do, and I get to see a record of it, okay? And I'm doing that because I care about you, and because sometimes kids need the help of adults, right? Just like you wouldn't let your kid get behind the wheel of a car, same thing here. Sometimes parents need to be there as well. Okay, number 2, I will set reasonable rules and guidelines for computer use by my children, and will discuss these rules and post them near the computer as a reminder. I'll remember to monitor their compliance with these rules, especially when it comes to the amount of time they spend in the computer. Number 3, I will not overreact if my child tells me about a problem he or she is having on the internet. Instead, we'll work together to try to solve the problem and prevent it from happening again. This is also a big thing. If you make it something which is very shameful, or you make it into a huge deal with them, they're not going to want to share it with you if they encounter something, right? Or if they have questions about something. You want to make yourself a source of information to them. You want to make yourself someone that they feel safe and comfortable coming to, not the opposite. Not someone like, uh-oh, that's the last person who I'd want to talk to about this. Number 4, I think is a very good one. I promise not to use a PC or the internet as an electronic babysitter, which I think is very tempting these days, right? We're all overextended and very busy, and it's very tempting sometimes to just, hand the kid the smartphone or the tablet, or let them use the internet for a while, maybe watch their favorite show. Don't give into that temptation. Your kid really needs you. Number 5, I will help make the internet a family activity and ask my child to help plan family events using the internet. I don't know about that one. Number 6, I will try to get to know my child's online friends just as I try to get to know his or her other friends. And again, this obviously will depend on to what extent your child is involved in using the internet and engaging with other people. Okay, place here for the parents to sign and the kids. There's another child's one, which again, I think this is a really good place to have a discussion with your kids, especially depending on how old your kids are. It has to be age appropriate. Okay, so with that, I will finish my talk here, and we'll open it up to any questions we'll start with.